mechanisms for the families because they can't afford, so to say, the girls, their daughters anymore, and they are, so to say, married away, so that the family has less mouths to feed. And yeah, these are mainly, there are many other, we could go into detail, right? However, but these are the three big, so to say, pillars why girls in general are having less access or less education than boys worldwide, and in crisis even more. And why is it good for the well-being? I think we three, I think, are a very good example, right? To showcase that our social environment, people who are with us, so to say, can also enjoy our smartness, can learn from us, can engage with us. We are there to share our potential, to share our ideas, our perspectives, to create better solutions for humankind. And we know also from studies, for example, that in countries where we have unfortunately not one country, right, that has achieved gender equality. However, there are enough studies that showcase that when they are, where you have more gender equality, the less fragile the countries and regions are. For example, I think this is also good for peace. And when we see also currently as well how many conflicts, crises and wars we have, I'm 100% convinced if women would have the opportunity to create and lead and take decisions more than they unfortunately managed to have until now, not because they can't, just because they are held back. I'm 100% convinced we would have a more peaceful world. And it's of course, I think, good for the well-being in terms of the communities. However, I think also for the well-being of ourselves, right? For the girls and women to be your own agent, to know your rights, to feel confident and comfortable, to speak up, to ensure that your voice is heard at least, if not maybe the decisive voice, or that will be the one that always, so to say, will be guiding decisions. However, I think it's liberating for ourselves as well to know that I am confident and I'm valued equally, or I'm as much valued like boys or men.
There's a saying that goes, when you educate a man, you educate an individual, but when you educate a woman, you educate an entire nation. And I think that's words to live by, and that shows just exactly how strong women are and what they're capable of if they have the opportunity to make change and have something to say. And who run the world? Girls.
Yes.
Zahra, from your point of view, what can and should the international community, and especially Germany, do to support and stand in solidarity with the women and girls in Afghanistan, and especially with regards to education?
Thank you for that question. One point that I want to make is that I want you all to understand that what's happening in Afghanistan should not be seen only as a problem of Afghanistan, only as a problem of Afghan women. It should be seen as a global problem, a crisis for women's rights globally, because that will bring the bar low of what could be denied to women, and there's nothing the so-called international community would do. You know, like 2 years have passed and nothing has been done in terms of getting action, a collective action to respond to it, because this is a global women's rights crisis of our time, the worst that we have so far. There is a women's rights activist from Afghanistan. She has been imprisoned by the Taliban because of her role in protest. She is right now protesting in Cologne, Germany. What she is asking for is the world, Germany, to recognize gender apartheid in Afghanistan, because that would give a framework of like how do the countries engage with gender, with an apartheid state. So I think that would be one of my recommendations, that we have to listen to these women's activists. And because what's happening in Afghanistan, when like women cannot leave their house, cannot earn their living, cannot feed themselves, cannot get education, for how long can this last? Because we will not be having any women doctors, women nurses, women teachers, even these 2 jobs that the Taliban would allow when the education is banned, when women cannot study beyond grade 6. So I think that's going to be a big crisis, and it needs a collective response from the countries that at least were involved in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. They need to come together and create, in a way, a framework where they would be responding to the Taliban, because what I am seeing as a journalist is, in a way, accommodation of the Taliban in the past 2 years, because the Taliban did not ban everything from the first day they took over. Like, it started slowly. They were just seeing like how would the world respond to them. What did the world do was just a statement of condemnation that yes, we are concerned, but we are not willing to do anything to press the Taliban to say, hey, we are not, enough is enough, that we will not be standing and playing this game with you. This is about human rights, and we will not be, being pushed back. Because it's not something that you would say, okay, like it's about culture. It's not. It's about human rights. It's about women's rights. It should be seen as that. So I think this concept of gender apartheid, and also having these countries working together to pressure the Taliban to reverse some of these policies in a way that would be measurable, actionable, where it's not going to be stay only in statements. We want action, and 2 years have passed. I think the Taliban have clearly showed who they are, what they want, what kind of society they want to build, and they are going to be a threat to the world. If this is also, I'm quoting from a women's rights activist who was also arrested by the Taliban. One time I was interviewing her, and she told me that the world should understand that the Taliban is like COVID-19. You cannot contain it within the borders of Afghanistan, no matter how hard you will try. It's going to be a threat to the world if the Taliban stay in power, because we know what vision they have for the world, for a society. So one thing would be that I'm asking Germany and other countries to come together and work in an actionable plan to deal with the Taliban. The least they can do is force the Taliban to reverse some of these inhuman policies. Second I can ask is that they start supporting alternative educations. There are lots of groups, communities, especially women taking the initiative. They're running secret schools where they would be teaching children, girls, in their own houses, like a few of them in their neighborhood. They come together and they teach and they build schools. This is one of the initiatives that I know that's happening in the country. As well, there are other initiatives like online schools. They are like, just providing the means, the internet device where these girls could study. And then connect them with like an online school where they will be able to continue their education. One thing I want to be clear here is, and some of us are worried about actually, is that if the Taliban open their school and then they Talibanize the curriculum where the children will be studying, and the world would be clapping and like jumping and saying, hey, finally the Taliban did open their school, let's recognize them, let's, give them whatever they needed. And you have to be very mindful of what kind of education are we talking about. It should be an education to the standard of the world. It should be a scientific education where they would be able to help the development of the country, not brainwashing a new generation of Afghanistan to become Taliban. We have enough, the US were saying 70,000. This 70,000 have destroyed the country. What if 5 years down the road we have millions of the Taliban? What's going to happen then? Again, it's not going to be contained in Afghanistan. if it's not being taken serious and it looked about, oh, we're tired of Afghanistan, we don't want to talk about it, like, let's put it there and let's find a way to deal with the Taliban. No, it's not only about Afghanistan. It's about the new generation that's growing up. And the Taliban are building thousands of schools in Afghanistan right now. The education system is shut down where they used to study getting scientific, like standard curriculum, and they're studying extremists, and like in a way being taught the Taliban's ideology of how a society should be, and it's like all in terms of like what's halal and what's haram and who should be killed and who, like this rhetoric. And then one of the requests or recommendation I can make is creating a pathway for supporting those who are really at risk, like women protesters, like women activists who actually protested the Taliban in the past 2 years, and their lives are at risk. They do not have any place to go. Some of them are like, it's a year or over a year that they're stuck in Pakistan. And look at the situation of Pakistan and Iran. Afghan refugees do not have any place to go. And because I was a refugee in Iran, I've been very much traumatized. I cannot even look the videos of how they're being beaten. Their house is being attacked because they happen to be Afghans. So the situation is not good, and I hope this country, as they welcome Ukrainians to their countries and open their borders and their doors, I hope that they can do, at least for some of these vulnerable Afghans who really, really need help, and give them a safety here in their country. Then one of the requests I want to make is that there's earthquake happening. And we had before that when the Taliban take over, everything sort of collapsed and 95% of the population do not have anything to eat. So we want the aid to go in Afghanistan, but we want the system to be created where they can monitor where this aid is going, because nobody wants the aid to go to the Taliban. So there should be a system that clearly be able to monitor that, and also to document human rights violations that's taking place in Afghanistan right now. Because what's the Taliban good at right now is only suppressing the people, killing the people, torturing them, and arresting them. And that's happening daily. We have right now two women activists who only protested for their rights. They are in prison, and their families didn't know where they are. We have journalists who have been in prison for months, and we have not heard of what is their crime, what they have done to deserve months of imprisonment, and of course torture. So that's basically what's happening, and I'm hoping that these countries would be able to help and create a way to monitor the aid, as well as monitor and document human rights violations that are taking place in Afghanistan right now.
So when aid is needed and when help is needed in the conflict-affected countries like Afghanistan, we need people to go all the way and to really follow up on the help. Is the money getting in the right hands? Are the schools teaching in the right subjects? Is the food being delivered to those who need it? And for the aid to not just be numbers in some government plan, because we are really talking about lives at risk. Serap, coming from an organization that deeply cares about equality and social justice, Oxfam, and that puts gender equality at the heart of its work, which responsibility do you think that the international community has, especially Germany, to promote educational opportunities for all girls and boys globally?
Thanks, Zahra. Incredible how you showcased how many avenues there are and what we have to be really sensitive about. And I really hope that you also have the opportunity to meet the State Secretary, or at least I would recommend that we send him, so to say, this panel conversation in the hope that he can push also for exactly the proposals and recommendations that you have made. I would on the top say, for example, GPE, as you know, Germany, you were mentioning it, was one of the countries supporting it. However, Oxfam with other organizations has calculated and showcased what would be the fair share of Germany contributing, so to say, to the budget. And unfortunately, Germany is not fulfilling its contribution. It should be 110 million every year in the coming years. It's only about 50 million to 75. It is varying. And also without, and if it comes to aid, because humanitarian aid or crisis are again it's something else there. You know, in the moment you have to, so to say, ensure that the people who are suffering that we are saving lives and that they get access quickly to shelter and food. However, if it comes then to the continuation, I absolutely agree that it has to be with conditions. Without conditionality, I think it most probably won't implement it in a manner that would also benefit, in particular, girls and young women in relation to education and access also then to higher education, or also informal trainings and informal education. So this is one ask that we would have, and think Germany has to have its fair share. Secondly, what we have seen over the many years of our work is that sometimes countries prefer, so to say, private education or supporting, so to say, private education in comparison to public education. And our research and studies show that this is, so to say, not opening the doors more, so to say, for marginalized groups or for girls. It's so to say, becoming even more unequal. So we are also demanding that the infrastructure and the public infrastructure has to be built up to ensure that there are equal chances and opportunities in regards to access and education for girls and young women.
Thank you so much for your insightful answers, both of you. It's been really inspiring. And some moments before we move on, I would like to open the floor for questions for our panelists. So feel free to raise a hand and we will get over to you with a mic and you can ask us some questions.
I wonder what we can do, because we obviously we cannot get all the women out of Afghanistan that are living under these conditions, but we cannot go into Afghanistan because I think then our life is threatened. So I really, right now, I don't know what to do to help.
So thank you for that question. I think there are things that could be done without, like, it's absolutely, I agree, like, there's no way to think of, like, get the entire population out or even the entire women of the country, just like, it's impossible. However, there are possibilities of, like, supporting some of this women, some of the people who, because of the work, because of who they are, their lives are at risk. So what I'm saying is opening that space, supporting that some resettlement of some of those people whose lives are at risk. That I think maybe Germany could do. The other thing that could be done is supporting, as I said, like supporting alternative education for girls and women in Afghanistan by providing the resources. And also supporting some of women-led groups that are working either outside Afghanistan or inside the country to be able to continue their work. For example, the organization that we created is called Zan Time. Zan means woman in our Farsi Dari language. and Zantine. So basically we started this to report and bring attention and raise awareness about what's taking place in Afghanistan in terms of human rights, and particularly to women in the worst country to be women, because we are sure that if you do not know what's taking place, it's unlikely that you would take an action to raise awareness or do something to change the situation. And then, you know, like this providing alternative education it could be empowering, you know, like online education or supporting groups that are organizing secret schools that are going underground to continue the education. So they need resources to continue, because for how long could the hungry volunteer to provide resources when they don't have, when their means run out, they cannot continue doing this. So I think empowering those spaces and also looking through ways, I think if we are thinking about the governments, I think there are things that the government could do. Most of the time when I talk to some of representatives, they feel powerless and say like, oh, the Taliban are not changing, we cannot do. I think there are things could be done. For example, putting more Taliban's leaders under ban, and also pressuring some of the countries that are empowering the Taliban, because if they are working with the Taliban and encouraging and promoting the Taliban agenda, of course they have some power on the Taliban, and that could be done, or at least reverse some of the inhuman policies like women not being allowed to go to school or women not being allowed to work. So I think there are things that could be done, but I think it's like, first, it cannot be done individually, maybe by one party. But when everybody comes together, I think there are things that the Taliban wants from the world. And it needs a very concrete, clear, actionable decisions about what we are going to do. And again, it should not be seen as, okay, like this is Afghanistan and we don't know how to deal with the Taliban. It should be seen as a women's rights crisis, worst women's rights crisis of our time. And then how do we respond to worst women's rights crisis of our time? We just remain silent and say, okay, we cannot do anything, because this could just happen in another country. And then what? There's going to be no action, because they're going to be another kind of the Taliban in maybe another part of the world. So I think we have to think about ways that we have to take action. I'm a journalist. I might not be able to give an examples of how that action might look like, but I'm sure there are ways to press the Taliban where it hurts, where it's effective.
First of all, thank you so much for being so brave and speaking up about all of these horrendous things that are happening. I was working previously for a social democratic parliamentarian who is sitting as a head of the Afghanistan Enquête Commission, and I know for a fact that they're obviously working really, really hard to ensure that there are proper solutions and policy recommendations by the end of 2025, the legislative period. But I also know for a fact that my parliamentarian was also a human rights activist, worker, as you want to say it. But whenever we try to do something about single circumstances, about Iran and a lot of people that were being held hostage, there was always the foreign ministry, but also like other parties that were in the way, and that called out the security issues that we have and the economic issues that we have that obviously are set in the forefront before human rights matters. So I think it's probably for the best to find ways to give means to Afghan women over there, but I think it's unfortunately always prioritized differently when it comes to human rights, that it's always first economic and then maybe security on the side, as we can see right now in Israel and Gaza as well, and then human rights. And I think it's important to keep up that work and to have a voice, but that's also something that we always have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I also, like in terms of these countries are already providing support for humanitarian crisis, or at least have done it in the past 2 years. But we have to be understanding that for how long these countries can support humanitarian help in Afghanistan, for how long can they give us the, like the money that goes in? We have to be understanding that this situation is there because the Taliban do not allow half of the population to earn their income. So as long as the Taliban do not allow them, we are going to have this humanitarian crisis where people cannot afford to eat. So I think we have to understand that negotiation of between like, okay, this is economic, so we can do this part, but we cannot do this. I think there are ways, if the will is there, I'm sure there could be things done.
But I also think like in that matter, you should believe and understand that it's an investment. So sure, the funding will not last forever, but if you use that to invest in education, it will be something you're investing in the future, in the girls and in the women that will be developed and will be able to help solve these challenges with economy and with security and so on. So no matter what, education seems to solve every problem somehow because you give power to half the population that stood with nothing. Thank you so much for answering and asking amazing questions tonight. Thank you for all your insights and your comments. A lot has been said about the power of girls' education, not only for the individual, but for the prosperity, the peacefulness, and the resilience of societies as whole. As you walk away from tonight's event and you reflect on today's discussions, it's essential to remember that the battle for girls' education is not confined to any single region or nation. According to UNICEF, 129 million girls worldwide remain out of school without education and face multiple barriers, even if they have the opportunity to go to school. These include distance to school, cultural norms and practices, school-related gender-based violence, and forced marriages. I'm asking all of you tonight to please take a stand, because not doing anything is also taking a stand. They say knowledge is power because information is liberating. So please help us liberate the millions of Afghan girls. Please help making sure that their future isn't determined by the odds, because the odds will always be against them. Help them determine their own future. Give them a chance by giving them a book, a pen, and a paper so that they can read, write, and raise their own voices. Thank you. In a moment, we will start the second part of tonight's event, the screening of the movie Children of the Taliban, a documentary that will transport us to the lives of 4 children in Kabul after the Taliban regained power in 2001. 2 boys with fathers in the Taliban and 2 girls, both 9 years old, that are no longer in school, but working on the street to provide for their families. The portraits of these 2 girls powerfully illuminates the challenges they face, the resilience they embody, and the urgency of safeguarding the right to education. Thank you so much, Zahra and Serap. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.